This week we're going to be making a Samantha recipe, and it is a very simple recipe because it's muffin method. It is a holiday recipe, which is a little bit different, but it's also good year-round, and so we're going to talk about some history as well a little bit later on. In this video, we are going to be making gingerbread, and this recipe is going to be coming from Samantha's cookbook. And so this is a recipe that's coming from the American Girl cookbooks once again. This recipe was not really mentioned in one of the books, but they did talk about gingerbread cookies in Samantha's Surprise, which was her Christmas story. And she talked about gingerbread houses. And the thing that I loved about the Christmas story was that they talked a lot about how homemade gifts were the best ones. And the other thing that I think is an important lesson to learn for adults in this particular story is how it's very easy to get wrapped up in preparing for Christmas and like getting wrapped up in decorations, and we forget that the most important thing about Christmas is spending time with each other and having fun with each other. That getting the house ready to have somebody come over, getting the house decorated and that kind of stuff, if we're not using those opportunities to spend time with people we love and letting them know that we love them, then none of that stuff makes sense. None of that stuff means anything. If you think back to the times that you loved best about being younger during the holidays, very few of them involved being busy. Most of them involved the quiet moments where you were just sitting at home watching movies, drinking hot chocolate under the Christmas tree, or maybe a very simple event that didn't require a whole lot of preparation. The best moments are in the stillness. So first you're going to melt 1/4 cup of butter, and this is going to be unsalted butter. And obviously they would have done it on the stove or over a fire, but we're going to do it in the microwave. And you want to use unsalted because we want to control that salt in there. Once that is melted, you're going to add your butter into a bowl with your egg and 1/2 cup of molasses. And most of your sugar for this recipe is going to come from your molasses. And just whisk that up. So, as we were talking, we're going to go into a little bit of history. So, women's suffrage began in 1869, which is a good bit before Samantha was born. And this was very shortly after the Civil War. And women began to fight for the vote very shortly after that. And Black men had already gotten the right to vote, even though there were definitely some things in place to keep them from voting because people were already trying to fight against them voting at that point in time. But women began to fight for that vote at that point in time, and different states allowed them to vote, but they did not fully get the vote for quite a while, and we'll talk about when they got that throughout the point. But there was a steady fight for women to be able to vote going forth all the way through up until the time that you saw Samantha's aunt fighting for this. So then we're going to put 1.5 cups of flour, 1/3 cup of sugar, a teaspoon of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/4 teaspoon of salt into a separate bowl. These are all your dry ingredients. We're also going to add 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves, 2 teaspoons of ground ginger, and a teaspoon of cinnamon to the bowl as well, and then stir that together to combine. We're using a dough whisk as well for this because that doesn't get all of the ingredients kind of caught up in there. And so just get that together combined, because once we combine those two, it's going to get tough. And then you're going to add those wet ingredients to your dry ingredients to get those combined together. Like I said, this is a muffin method recipe that makes it very easy. So just add those in there and get them combined together. I give the wet ingredients a quick stir before I add them in. So, hey, if you could hit that subscribe button real quick, that would be great. It would help our channel out a whole lot, and we'll get back to the video. It took until 1920 for white women to gain the right to vote. And it is very important to say that white women got that right. Technically, it was pretty much everybody, but there were some things in place that people were kind of shady about that kept everybody from being able to vote, especially in the South at that point in time. They were putting things into place like poll taxes and literacy tests to keep African Americans from being able to vote at that point in time. In 1920, women were allowed to vote at that point in time. So that is what people were fighting for. So then we are going to grease your pan with melted butter and line the sheet of parchment with that, just to kind of keep that bottom from sticking. I think the thing that made me kind of really realize how recent all of this is Samantha is my great-grandmother's age, and I knew my great-grandmother. Her name was Bibi, and so to know that people my grandmother's age were alive when women didn't have the right to vote is kind of wild. The biggest thing that we need to understand about all of this is that a lot of our citizens, people that we see every day, did not have the full right to vote until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And there are videos online where you will see people talking about the fact that there were poll taxes that people had to pay in order to vote. There were literacy tests enacted. There are still copies of this on the internet that you can see, and if you got one question wrong, you were not allowed to vote. So those are things that you need to understand and know why voting rights are so incredibly important. The other thing that we need to understand is that women did not have the right to open bank accounts or own homes in their own names on their own until 1974. This is a very recent time. And when we talk about the fact that a lot of these things were very hard fought, these time periods were not that long ago. And so we need to understand that a lot of the people that are seeing things start to be run back and certain acts going away, there's a reason why people are scared when the Voting Rights Act goes away, because we know what that particular act meant. So we're going to bake this for 20 to 25 minutes at 350 until you press it and it springs back. Samantha is an incredibly important American girl doll because she was alive at a very important time in history when women were fighting for the right to vote, and so many people realized that it was so important that every single citizen had the right to vote. And it is very, very important that we study history, and so many of us were reading these books growing up and are continuing to realize that these stories are the stories that shaped us. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Mixing with Mercs, and we will continue to share these stories over time, and we will see you next week.